things like that. Thank
It's already started and Debbie's talking. And anyway, Debbie, welcome back to And Double D. We are back here today, super excited. I'm Dave Evans and you are,
Debbie Halls Evans.
of course, naturally, because I said that, didn't I? We started doing the videos in this season. I've just realized above my head, I can actually see Debbie's face in the distance. Isn't that funny? But we are here with somebody we're really excited about talking to. Debbie, would you like to do the honor of introducing our guest?
Well, I am staggeringly excited about our conversation that we're going to have today. And Stephanie Harrison, the author of New Happy, has got so much to share. And I'm just going to pass straight over. Firstly, to Stephanie, explain or share in as articulate as you are, what New Happy and what it means to you in the book.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here with both of you, beautiful people. So the highest level summary is essentially that New Happy is a different philosophy of happiness that I've developed based on 10 years of research that argues that, one, the way that we're pursuing happiness is making us very unhappy. And two, it's contributing to all of these broader problems in our world. And so if we change that, we'll not only be able to make ourselves happy, but also to fix many of these bigger problems that we're seeing everywhere.
And genuinely, I have to show you something because this will make you smile. So this is my New Happy book.
Oh my God.
And knowing how much we love stationery as well. But this is, I mean, I must have read it, I don't know, so many times.
Oh,
but
you're going to make me cry. I'm tearing up.
Each colour tab has a meaning as well. So I've been very Stephanie in it in regards to being very organised in it. But I think this is the bit that I really want to share with people. And also fundamentally for us is how we use this within our coaching practice. And I've said to you many times that it's a book I wish I'd written, but also knowing that somebody's actually articulated what I think we've maybe struggled to even put a name to it. You know, Dave and I both come from very corporate backgrounds, and old happy, identified by that definition of my job, my role, conforming, also always being told, you know, we got names like Mavericks, or you're a bit odd, or you're a bit weird, or you don't fit in, and all of those things, which you then suddenly realize we were living old happy big time.
So, Debbie, before you jump into that, because I think we want to hear what Steph has to say, right? So, but before you do, I'd like to also link in because Debbie brought your book to my attention, and I do cycling, and I combine cycling and learning. So I do two things that I like and stack them. And I remember cycling over the mountain and behind us, coming back up the other side, having multiple thought experiences that were a little bit like this. Oh no. I'm a bit like, I forgot about, and feeling joy and frustration, because it does both things. But Debbie, sorry about that. I interrupted you, but I just wanted to join in.
Of course, you're welcome to. So I suppose our first question, and I've written a couple of questions because I really want to make sure we maximize your very precious time. And I think the biggest one for us that we considered and reflected on is, why now? Why is New Happy so important? Because I think we've got our own understanding of that. But from your perspective, I would love to hear why now.
It's a really good question. You know, it's so funny because I feel like it took me like 10 years to be able to write the book and to take those formless ideas and feelings that you talked about, which is such a common reaction to the book of people saying, oh, I felt this and I have been thinking something similar, which makes me feel really happy because it's like, it speaks to a collective shift in our consciousness and in the values that we have and the way that we're living. So it took me this very long time to write it because it was really hard to name these things that are so taken for granted and trying to describe them in those ways. And so the whole time I was writing it, I was beating myself up because I was saying like, you're going too slow. You need to move faster. You need to get this out there sooner. The problems are just getting worse. And none of that worked, of course. Beating myself didn't make me any more effective. But I think when I think about why now, I think that we're sort of barreling down this path without thinking about it towards more and more old happy in our culture. And as we're doing that, we're spreading all of these issues and we're perpetuating them, and they're becoming more intractable, more difficult to solve. And I think about things like climate change or human rights that are being walked back in the United States, and all of these things that are happening. And I really have come to believe that this understanding of happiness is that root cause. And so for me, like, the most urgent time is right now. It would have been even better 5 years ago, but we couldn't make that happen. So now is the best time. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on it and what you think.
Well, I'm very similar to you. I do feel that, and I've always explained to you about being a parent has been something that I've actually struggled with, right? So it was never this natural. So I think that's this old happy. To be a parent, you must be maternal, earth mother. You must feel this. You must, again, very old happy. And I think for me, it was about being the parent and being able to share this with the kids and start to have these conversations that we do not need to conform to these things. There are other options. And I think the biggest thing for me is why now is that we are getting sucked into this abyss and vortex and losing identity and losing control, I suppose. And no happy isn't control, but it's this, we demand something from other people, so they have to fit, they have to be labeled, they have to, and then as I'm rambling now, but I was saying to Dave before, was this state of we get that we then just assume. So, and I think that's so old happy, right? So we assume everything. So, we coach people who lead businesses, and our joy is being able to share, actually, are you conforming or are you actually being yourself? And how many times are we actually ourselves? And that's why I think for me now it's so important. And it's very personal because we've got children and we've now got grandchildren.
And from my perspective, Stephanie, is in 2012, I spoke to a group of people in a workshop experiment around leadership. An electric moment in a castle near Inverness. And it was this moment where two groups had failed a task, and we'd given them a real life business situation simulation, two groups, and both groups failed it. And there was little leadership demonstrated by anyone in them. And over those couple of days, we concluded that the world is in a period of leadership deficit. The West definitely is. And if you just take leadership deficit issues, they have so much old happy in them, myself included. We were talking this morning about it around, because you asked about our experience. I feel like I'm in this osmosis of living most of my life, even today, to have so many, and I know you to any listener, you don't say that nice things aren't okay. But if you think about what you aspire to or to have or to create, I'm in this place where so much of my life has had that, but the nice place is thriving in the middle, and then over here is this. I'd rather be this way, and that transition sometimes daily feels really challenging and really hard.
Yeah, I can so appreciate that. And I'm really grateful to you for sharing. I think that feeling is so normal. Like, I always talk to people about how I'm in the process of unwinding old happy in my life too, right? Like, as I navigate the world, I always think about it as like you pick up all this junk that you bring into your house, and then you have to house clean and you have to decide what you're going to keep and what you want to get rid of. And it would be a violation of the philosophy to say that I have it mastered perfectly, because that would require me to be perfect, which is not what we're striving for. And I have my moments of getting caught up in it or doing things and then looking back and going, oh, like, gosh, that was super old happy. I shouldn't have done that, or I could have behaved differently. And I think, like, I find it really interesting because, to your point about the leadership deficit, we have so little room for nuance or for growth or for making mistakes or any of the things that we know would help to make better leaders. And I just think it would be great if we were just willing to give ourselves and other people more grace for being in that osmosis stage and recognize that that's what being a human is all about. And this very restrictive, harsh, punitive culture is actually preventing us from being who we want to be.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your thought on this. So I challenged somebody in LinkedIn today, and it was about leadership and another model and another framework, and it was this very academic thinking. So I called it, leadership is being I'm not going to say if it's
Intelligentalized.
whatever the word is. But anyway, we're making it something it's not. And to me, leadership's really simple. It's be human, be kind, be respectful. I don't need to be a color profile. I don't need to have this certain style. As if I'm a leader or I'm in a role that has those elements to it, and I'm here really clear of my old happy language, demands of, but if it has those elements, leadership is about support, guidance, collectiveness, not individual, I'm better than you, and hierarchy. How do you see that? Because I also know you do a massive amount of research. So again, is that this kind of, there is a flow in between the two for us to finally at one point in our lives to get to new happy?
I think I much prefer your definition and understanding of leadership. I think that if we could all adapt that, the world would be a much better place. And I especially appreciate that it's so focused on character. I think that's something we've really lost. I think that so much of even like the way, if we think about the way that like capitalism has forced all of these like hundreds of different models out there and different ways of analyzing yourself or understanding yourself, and they all cost, thousands of dollars to run through the model and to learn it and to be certified in it and to adopt it, like it doesn't benefit old happy culture to have a simple mantra like leadership is being a good person, which is basically what I would say that you just said, and being of service to the people around you, because how are you supposed to monetize that?
Yeah.
And it's our business, right? So this is what we do. And I think it does feel a bit like salmon swimming upstream, is you are, because exactly what you've said, it is capitalized and it is commercialized, but we also run a business. And I think this is where Dave sits in, we were talking about it this morning, is it's that balance. And, we genuinely, our natural philosophy, and we've literally gone through diaries and books and everything for the past 20 years. So how are we being consistent on this one? Is to give first. And that's not a normal business practice. It's, you've got to buy off me first. You've got to do this first. You've got to get and I think for me, it's really important that we get to this point of, how do we start to be and accept somebody just as they are? I mean, that would bring me so much joy, because we assume or we judge, or they don't fit what we expected of them. How do we get to that? Because I know you've got lots of ways, beautiful ways of sharing that.
I think that in many ways, it's a moment by moment practice, and that's what makes it feel achievable to me. So if I think about, like, for example, like these kind of ideas, many of the new happy ideas, of course, are reflected in religions and spiritual traditions and in other, forms of character building or practices. And I think that I always reflect on how it can feel really overwhelming for people to listen to something like like a commandment of like love thy neighbor, or of a principle of, practicing universal love for people, which again shows up in like every religion and spiritual tradition. And I think that instead, if we started to recognize that acceptance and love are moment by moment choices, then it becomes, to me at least, much more manageable, because all I have to do is focus on, this moment and this experience with this other person and the depths to which I'm willing to accept and love them. And then when I'm done with them and I move on to another person, I get to try again. And so if I failed the first time, I can learn something from it and apply it the next one. And it becomes less of an identity and more of an action of acceptance. And I do think that sometimes that identity of like being a good person or being a virtuous person ends up backfiring and tripping us up, because we become so attached to that we become fragile if it's threatened. Yep. And, like thinking about so many of the conversations that were had, for example, starting in 2020, when there was, the conversations around the racial inequities that existed around the world, and how all of these white people were going, well, I'm a good person, I can't be a racist. And then that belief prevented them from challenging their biases and the ways that they were participating or affected by systemic racism. And so the more I think that we can say, like, I want to accept the next person I talk to and give them the love that I have, and then and learn from that, that will then build us into that type of person.
And how, so this is a big question, so please challenge me on it. But in regard to how do we deal with somebody saying, oh, it's woo-woo, or it's, as you said, you know, people connect it directly to spiritualism, or even worse, oh, it's just weirdos that follow that. How do you deal with that on a personal level?
Before you answer that, Stephanie, I think that last moment needs to be given a bit more airtime, because in my experience of what you just described, of working on the next moment of accepting somebody and doing better, I remember when I first considered the John Maxwell quote from 30 years ago, which was, to be a good leader, and I best not do the accent, you've got to value people. But he talked about it like loving people in his tonality. And I always remember thinking an immensely shallow thought, which was, but what if they smell? Right? And I know that's ridiculous, but I went straight to, you know, I don't want to hug them, you know, I don't want to touch them, and I got stuck in this shallow moment. And I love your answer, because going back to that moment where I was at one of my worst moments, I can then think, well, I can have another go. I can give it a shot. I can find out the next time. And I don't have to be stuck at, you know, that what if they smell moment. Not to labor on it.
Yeah, no, that's so beautiful, Dave, because like, who among us doesn't have thoughts like that? Who among us doesn't judge other people or look around and think, oh God, like I would never do that, or that person's an idiot or a jerk or whatever. We all do it. And pretending that we don't and that we're, you know, above, it becomes another way to like actually dominate other people, or to put yourself in a hierarchy of being better than others, versus like the true love and character and leadership that's grounded in humility and in recognizing that we're all here to serve each other and we all have different roles that we can play in doing so. So for me, it's been a much more, as somebody who spent my whole life trying so hard to be perfect, and trying so hard to do everything right, that I essentially left myself paralyzed and unable to function. The generosity that it's provided for me to say, I can take this literally one interaction at a time or one moment at a time, and I can always learn and do a little bit better. It's just given me so much more space, and paradoxically has allowed me to embody the things that I wanted to do, but was never available to because of the way I was going about them.
No, I love it. Now, before we come back to your question, Debbie, I'd like to also go to something that we did prepare earlier about what it meant to us in our pre-discussions. And one of the things that I was struck by, so you may or may not know or remember that your book was a key part of the preparation work and discussion during our leadership gathering in Mallorca, which is
so cool.
Was doing it first, right? So we were doing it ourselves first. And I one of the things that I took from it, which really got me excited. So our event was about survive and thrive, and how to, what you just described, be in that moment. And I love your take of moment by moment. And there's a whole piece of work we do about surviving and thriving that helps people rewire their brain and their day one day at a time. But what I loved about listening to your book is and then doing our prep, I felt like you took age out of the question, because I found myself going, your work is so rich that it's alongside what we were about to do, like this. And if I couldn't see you today and you couldn't see me, or Debbie couldn't see me, and we didn't know each other, all we had was voice, you'd make all kind of assumptions about what our age might be, right? But you took time out of the equation. And I think there's a consciousness awake in the world at the moment where there are people of all ages coming up with, like you, coming up with great work that sit alongside this synchronistically timeless pieces. So
Mm.
that's why I think it's super important in your question, Debbie, to ask about woo-woo, because we face that every day. We face that every week, right? Whether it's
Mm.
leadership, communication, candor, conduct, we see it every week. That's, so now, Debbie, let's come back to your question about how do you handle woo-woo, because people do think that.
Mm.
That means so much to me, Dave. Thank you. Okay, so I have a couple of strategies depending on the person. And one of the ones that is a little bit like maybe a tiny bit more combative than I would usually be is like, what if it works? Who cares if
Yeah.
it's woo-woo? Does it work for you? And to me, I think that that's always what I'm driving for is effectiveness. And I know that that's what matters to both of you too. Like we want, this isn't about ego or saying like this idea is the best thing or this one is wrong. It's about how do you find something that works? And I know that for me, when I have tried different things, that's what's given me new insights or new experiences that have helped me to be more effective towards my goal. So if something works, then really like, do you really care about its provenance? Do you really care about whether or not it's referenced in the Old Testament or comes from Sikh Hindu traditions or whatever it is, right? Like there's all information has a source. And as you said, Dave, many of these sources for these ideas are centuries old. And we could trace them back there if we wanted to, but we could also look to the effectiveness of them in the moment, in the modern age, and how we can tweak them and adjust them. The second thing that I always talk about is, well, every single statement that's in the book is backed up by science and backed up by research. And if you would like to go and read those studies, you are more than welcome to. They're all available online, and you will likely come to the same conclusion as me if you were to go through that reading journey. And then, the third thing that I like to think about is this like the core true self of the person who's raising this critique? Or is it a part of the self that's driven by fear or by a sense of worry about what other people will think of them or any other sort of difficult emotion? And if that's the case, if it's coming from one of those parts of them, then it can almost be an invitation to better understand what they're worried about. So, for example, if let's take like loving kindness meditation as an example, a Buddhist practice that's now been empirically studied, but that might feel a little woo-woo to somebody to send love to others, in your head or in person when you see them. What is it about that that's upsetting or triggering for this person? Is it that they feel like they didn't get love from people like that, or that no one else is ever going to do that for them? Is it that they're scared that maybe if they start doing that, it's going to crack something open inside of them and they're not capable of dealing with that on their own? And if so, how do I meet them with some support or make it feel safe for them to start to embrace those moments of opportunity of growth? So that's generally how I tend to approach it when people ask me about it in person.
I'd like to just play back to anyone listening today to think about that whole question around, I've come across this in hypnosis sessions. One of the things I deal with beforehand is what we're about to do today, you can undo in a split second, or you can roll the dice and find out if it's true. It's up to you. And I love that idea, that simplicity you just described. And if you're listening, if there's something in your way, if there's something you're struggling with, what if the answer was the next thought you had that was better than the last one and you stuck to it? What if it was that easy? Because quite often the first move is. And I really love that. Debbie.
Right, Stephanie, do you know what he does? When we're in a workshop environment, Dave has this terrible habit of he'll just stop talking and just go, Debbie. And he just
I love it.
throw me under the bus in the process. But no, thankfully I've got hundreds of things I want to say. So in regards to, so I love that. So there is a real clear way of dealing with it, which is still from a base of kindness and best intent, is that we don't know who we're talking to unless that person decides to share it. And we also really focused on not assuming or judging that person, which takes us back to that moment in moment. And, if we have to improve it for the next one, great. If not, Great. So there's a couple of things I want to explore. You just touched on them, which was great. So I think it'd be really wonderful for people to understand your background and the research and the time that you have took. So this is not you've woke up one day and go, oh, I'm just going to share this idea. And the exploration that you've gone under over the past decade before you brought New Happy out. So share what that was and how that's helped you.
I started my career as a management consultant working in HR for a very large company, you know, kind of the stereotypical, again, travel around the country every day, every week and go to companies. And it was obviously like very much not the right fit for me, as anyone who knows me now can attest to. The fact that my job now is making art and talking about happiness, I think can illustrate that. But I learned so much from that, especially a lot of really important skills about how to communicate ideas and work with people who might be antagonistic to you or might not be interested in what you have to say or why you're there. And so then I went to go work at LinkedIn, where I was responsible for I had a whole bunch of jobs there, but that was where I also ended up going to get my graduate degree in positive psychology. So it was there that I started to sort of form these ideas. When I was getting my degree, I ended up writing my final thesis on the very beginning of New Happy, and it was a highly incomplete version. I hadn't even developed the idea of Old Happy at that time, but I had identified what I felt, you know, the pathway to true happiness was at a very, very surface level. And so when I graduated, I started doing further research on my own and like really sort of trying to develop it out. And then I ended up starting the New Happy, my organization, as a newsletter, like a weekly newsletter that was teeny, teeny, tiny. It was just me writing every week, sharing some of these ideas with people. And I just did that every week on the side of my full-time job. I eventually went to go work for Ariana Huffington, where I was responsible for building the learning business at her company Thrive, which is devoted to creating well-being at companies. And so that was where I, again, learned so many amazing skills about creating educational content and translating science into things that are accessible for all populations and all of that. And then eventually I ended up leaving Thrive after a little bit over a year and deciding that I wanted to work on sharing the New Happy full time. And I had no idea what I was doing. I stumbled around for a very long time. I started making this artwork, and then that ended up sort of being really well received by people online. And then I ended up building the newsletter and all of these other things. And now a couple of years later, I'm here. So it's been a very long journey of very unclear steps forward in the darkness, and then just like kind of scrambling my way through, trying to find my way.
That's cool.
It's fascinating, and I do think there is something we definitely need to touch on, and it is the art. And I think this is for me what I took from New Happy. Old Happy is very complex, and it needs to be complex to keep us contained in it. But what you've done with New Happy is you've made something very complex into something very simple, and then you've also added the animation and the art to go with it. I know we've asked you this in the New Happy Book Club and also in the ambassador. How do you do that? What goes through Stephanie's brain to take that massive amount of complexity? Because we can't underestimate this, and we gift your book everywhere to everybody. It's a must-have, and but I think that's really important, is that your brain is translating this very complex to simple, which then I think that's the reason why you're building this community and this collective movement, because people go, oh yeah, I get it. Because before we haven't had that simplicity from this huge context to actually, this is what it means. How do you do that? I don't know. Really answer that question.
No, it's a great question. I think like I would say that like one of the features of my, my unique brain, like we all have our own little unique brains, is that I've always been good at spotting patterns and being able to distill things down into like simple summaries. And so it was something in many ways I learned as a consultant, because you have to analyze, hundreds of pages of a client's problems and then give a little executive summary. And I think that probably helped me to kind of strengthen that muscle in many ways. And then, of course, with research and reading all of these studies and everything, in many ways, it would be, reading a 30-page paper and then going, okay, the core finding here is that compassion increases, relationship well-being by 30% or whatever it is. And then kind of locking that away in my brain somewhere. And then eventually being able, with enough time and investment, like to be able to go back into those little cubby holes and to then figure out what the patterns were and how they all connect. And so I don't have like kind of an explanation other than I probably have a predisposition to it. And I also work really hard at it. And I've practiced a lot. And that's probably been the most important thing is, like when I started the New Happy and started making the artwork, it wasn't good. It wasn't doing what I wanted it to. It wasn't communicating the ideas in the way that I hoped. But I just kept going and just kept trying to get a little bit better over time. And eventually it started to click. And even now, like I'll still make art pieces that don't quite work or aren't quite hitting it in the way that I want them to, or whatever it is. And that's okay. It's another opportunity for me to try again and to further streamline the message and get better. But I would say that like once you have, as you said, Debbie, like we needed a new framework. That was like the kind of the most important thing I think that we figured out is if you give people something to hang their clothes on, then they can start to understand and organize their clothes, right? They can put the colors together or the shirts and the pants separately. But if you don't give them the coat rack, then all of your crap is just on the floor and it's all a mess. And I think that's how a lot of us feel when we don't have language or frameworks around things. And so ultimately, in many ways, I think that the kind of contrast of New Happy and Old Happy, and then identifying the components that fall under that has hopefully given people that coat rack so that they can start to hang things up and then sort their own experiences in an effective way.
Can I ask you a sub question?
Yeah.
Have you ever asked somebody what the physiological experiences of looking at your artwork is?
No.
Well, this is a massive survey of one, right?
Most important.
Yeah, it is just me, but I wonder how common it might be if anyone's ever noticed it, right? So I noticed it because I look at the things you put on LinkedIn as great artwork, and I observe it, and I have this common thing that happens. I go like this.
Oh.
It's like belief, right? And therefore, if you haven't noticed that, I know one said, right? That's a really good thing for someone to do, is to have a slower breath out.
Mm.
I I I also have a different problem. I go on LinkedIn and I'm active because we're supposed to be, and I don't really like it, right? So I'm in there not liking stuff, and then I read or see something that you've done and go, and it's
Mm.
this nice moment. So I guess that's why I asked the question.
Thank you so much. That's such a treasure you've given me of kindness. Thank you. I mean, I always wanted it to feel like that, I guess. I've never consciously put words to it in that way, but if I think about what a dream response would be, it would be what you just described. And in many ways, like I hope that the art gives people that chance to sort of pause and then like a gentle way to start to reconsider these ideas, like to your point, Dave, like I don't like consuming content on social media. I try and avoid it as much as I can because so much of it is just like aggressive and punitive and yelling at people or self promotionary, or like it doesn't create like a sense of ease inside of me in those ways. And I always wanted the New Happy to be something different and to give people that moment of like connectedness, ideally to themselves, in a way that would hopefully spark some connection with others. So that really means the world to me. Thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Debbie.
Now, I also, Dave, stop doing that.
I'm going to steal that.
But I also think there's something about, and art or creative people for me I'm always in awe or fascinated by them, not in a negative way. I just that's amazing. Somebody's got that skill. You call it gifts, right? Though that person's gifts, and just seeing that, I think it's just, and that's lovely to see Dave go, because I know sometimes you can get like there's a lot going on. So my next question, are you ready for this one? So
look what I've done.
what have you done now?
I've brightened my light.
Have you? That's very good. Well done. That came across very patronizing. Sorry, Dave. So then I suppose there's layers to New Happy. I've got 2 questions, so apologies. Just this, so I remember them. Dave will remember them for me. Is one, I want to talk about the community and that collectiveness, which is really important. So the movement of New Happy. And then I think for me, the other part is also understanding me as a person. How do I start? And I know pick up the book, read the book, but actually, if I'm stuck in an environment that I know isn't healthy for me, or I'm just stuck, and this is 99% of the people we work with, that is the first thing they'll say to us, I'm just stuck. And it could be in any scenario, whether it be life or professional, whatever depths it is. How do we do that? How do we get somebody to understand that there is a way? Because there is.
Yeah.
What would your kind of first piece of advice be?
Those are such great questions. I think, so for the first with the community element, I think, because so much of the core message of the philosophy is like, we're not supposed to do this alone. I really wanted, a book is a very singular experience in many ways, right? It's you reading a book and you having your own personal experience of it. And so I always dreamed of making a collective experience alongside of that would be able to not only give you the support as you read it. And again, like going through that osmosis process that Dave mentioned is really hard a lot of the time and complex and brings up all of these emotions. And so people need support as they do that, but also as a chance to practice the values that we're putting forward and to prove to ourselves that it's possible. Because I know there are people who think that I'm just a wild idealist, that think that, there's no way this is going to work. We're never going to be able to dismantle these beliefs or these systems. But I have watched people transform in our community. I have watched them get through experiences that they've been carrying around for years. I've watched them get unstuck, to your point. I've watched them discover who they really are and then start helping people. And I've watched them learn to trust and love people again. So I know it's possible now. And even if we're just doing it on this micro level in these, like 200-person book clubs or these community gatherings that are smaller, that doesn't matter. It's the same thing. It's the same principle. It just would be applied at a bigger level. And of course, there are new complexities that come as we get to, thousands or tens of thousands or however it expands. But I think we're completely capable of navigating those as long as we hold fast to those values. And so for me, the community part has been the best thing that's happened. Like I would never be here without it because I would never have gotten to meet you. And I would never have had all these incredible life experiences and moments of connection and love and care and the chance to help people. And that's literally what it's all about. So how do we do that for people? And so that to me has become like just the sort of real joy of my life is working in this community and thinking about how we start to expand it and share it with people who need it, which sort of, I guess, feeds into your second question. If someone's listening to this, I would say that they should call both of you and get your help, because I would say that you two are perfectly equipped to be able to support them in what they're going through. So that would be my first piece of advice, is to reach out to Debbie and Dave and to get the help and the support that you need. And then if that's not possible for you for whatever reason, then I always think like happiness is just one choice away, it's just one different choice away for me. And you never really know what it might be. Like I had a breakdown when I was in my early 20s, which started me down this pathway and this journey. And in that moment, I never would have guessed that moment of despair would lead me to being here in a conversation with you talking about the book I had written. Like I never could have imagined that, because it would have felt like a complete pipe dream. And sometimes the moments that lead us to happiness are hidden in tragedy or in pain or in suffering. We just can't trace them at that moment. Or
Yeah.
they're the simple gesture to go and like help your neighbor, or to call a friend who's having a hard time and check in on them, or tune into yourself and pay attention to your feelings for the first time. Those moments all lead to somewhere, and we don't always know what that's going to take. And if we let go of that need to control the future, and again, just focus on like what the next moment, what's possible, I think that there's a lot of miracles that can happen.
And I can only advocate what you say is, we've said this is our approach, is that we work with one person at a time to benefit the many. And I think it's really important, because it's, if you're in a workshop environment, every single person will take what they need in that moment for them. And I think we can get sucked into old, happy, prescriptive workshops, which are, you get a leader that comes and tells you this person is this, they give you their dictate of whom these people are, which they never are, by the way. And then that they have their own expectations and outcomes for each individual, but never for themselves. And I think that's fascinating, is that, it is possible. And I do love the fact that we do need people. We need each other. And for whatever reason, we are told we don't need it. You published a quote, I was telling Dave about it this afternoon, the one about needing a village, and it was about new parenting. Loved that. I hadn't seen the original. So when I saw yours, I was reading, I was fascinated by it. Do you want to just quickly share that? Because I think that really embodies what you've just said as well.
Yeah, there's this article that came out a week or two ago, where this new parent was talking about how like every new parent talks about how I want a village to help me raise my kids, but no one is willing to behave in villagey ways, which just, I love the description of that, because it was another way of saying like old happy, right? Like it was great. And so anyways, I posted about it and sort of added my 2 cents, which is basically that if you have grown up in old happy culture and you have been told from the moment of your birth that your happiness comes from focusing more and more on yourself, caring less about other people, achieving your personal goals, and then you tell that person to like go build community, you're not going to get a lot of traction, because at the very deepest core, they don't think that building community is going to bring them happiness. And if we don't believe something is going to bring us happiness, we're not going to stick with it. And so I think it's a really interesting example when we look at the deep loneliness epidemics that are happening with the polarization of people, with the sense of disconnectedness that's, really so prevalent. I really trace it back to those old happy values where we're told like focus on yourself and you're on your own and do it by yourself and all those things. And if we don't challenge that, then we're not going to be able to have the outcome of the village or the community or the world that we want.
So, I know we could go on forever, and I'm aware that we do need to at some point stop talking. I suppose one final bit for me, and I'm sure Dave will summarize as he always does articulately well with the drop mic moment. But in regards to I think that is a big part, and I know we've touched on it, and I see it a lot in some of the community feeds, which I'm being educated so much, and I love it. But in regards to his challenge, dealing with challenge, and knowing that it's actually okay for somebody to say, I don't get that, I don't understand it, and us being okay to go, okay. Dave, there was an example you gave to me the other day about, and I know you don't want to go into the complexity of the actual people, but the football.
Again, I'd like to let some of this hang just a little bit longer, right? So, because the gold here can be missed if we're too fast. And where I went in both your question and your answer, Stephanie, was with community. We were at a wedding last week, and I'm happy to give Ethan a shout out, Debbie. He was asking really brave questions. He's 21. He was asking really brave questions of me, Debbie, and his mum and his stepdad about how do you shift your mindset from wanting success and wanting balance, essentially. And he's 21 years old. Now,
Joy, it was lovely.
It was a wonderful conversation. The point I want to make first is the great thing about New Happy is it's relevant right now, today, right? It will be tomorrow by default because the deficit in leadership alone is ginormous, right?
Mm.
So, but what he did really well, I think, is he made us stay, and we worked hard to do the same thing. To not say, let's say he asked us any question, we all battled with ourselves because we all wanted to answer from experience. Whereas what he was asking was, how do you do that today? Not what you do when you were in this big job or what you learned it for the first time. He said, how do you do that today? And what it showed up for me was if any one of us four didn't quite do something we were recalling, it was immediately inauthentic.
Mm.
The word. So you then had to recheck and say, well, what do I do?
Mm.
If you think about that one example, and there were many other marvelous things that he was asking, we all have a duty to show up right now.
Mm.
Well, I think the community is magical because you've got a chance. You got, and you said earlier on that next moment to just do better than you did a second ago. Have another go. It's okay.
Mm.
But Debbie, the example you were talking about is a well-known soccer club. It's an important week in the world of sport. People are wearing rainbows and about human equality.
Mm.
The letters, I apologize, I often mess up the order because my brain doesn't see letters that way. And I just see everyone as the same, as in we're all as important as each other. But they had a disagreement in the squad. One player, for faith reasons, didn't want to support the cause. And the whole squad, I think, made an absolute massive faux pas. They just
Mm.
stand with the player. And
Mm.
the point is that actually it's okay to not agree with something because I was confident that the player that didn't want to do it for faith reasons is probably a really nice person. It's because and the actual person that it is, I'm pretty confident they are a really nice guy, right?
Mm.
Let him not do it and let it be okay,
Right,
right?
right.
And the team should have worn the colours, and it
Yeah.
should have been a point of division, which is of course all happy and plays to all kinds of stereotypes. Debbie, is that the one?
That was, yeah. And I think that the point for me was when Dave shared it to me was that we get sucked into wokeness or all of these other idealisms, but there isn't an idealistic perspective here. It's actually, as a human, this matters to me, this matters to you. We don't need to fight about it. It's just that is your opinion. Great, I respect that. This is my opinion. Doesn't mean that we still can't get along. And I think
Mm.
that's what happens. I think we get stuck in this cycle that there's got to be one singular way, and there isn't, because we're all, and I loved your language about my unique brain, and we are, I say that as humans, biologically, we're pretty much the same, but we're all gift wrapped perfectly,
Yeah.
differently.
Love that.
And I think there's quite pertinent for Christmas. But in regards to is, I think there's that for me is that we can get lost when we the best intention, because I genuinely believe they were doing that from best intention. But there's lack of conversation, there's lack of community, there's lack of collective thought that says, well, actually, this is how I feel about it, so I'm going to support. I don't know, maybe I'm just chuthering.
No, I think, I think what's really interesting is that like we have to recognize that everyone has different backgrounds, different mental models, different understandings, different worldviews. And when we attack each other for those worldviews, we only polarize ourselves further. And meeting people who have different beliefs with love, kindness, and compassion is what allows them to hopefully to shift them in different directions that are more generative, more supportive, more accepting, and further the progress of the human species. And so I think that I agree with you, Dave. I think that having had those other members of the squad gone out and said, this is what we believe and we're holding fast to that, it doesn't mean that we're hating on this other person or we're shaming them in some way, but we're also welcoming, we're standing tall in our beliefs and what matters to us, and we're acting as symbols for those fans out there who are a part of the LGBTQ community or who feel like they've been oppressed or any of those other things. That can be what also transforms different perspectives into ones that hopefully help us open up to more love, to better relationships, to healthier communities and all of that.
Love it. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, we could just stop at that point. Now, I do want to just make sure we share. There's a couple of things that I believe everybody in the whole wide world should get involved in. One of them is book club.
Yeah.
And there's January book club coming up. So
Yeah.
what's the best and easiest way for people to get onto January book club? And it's free and it's for 5 weeks. And my question was, how do I start? I just think that is one of the most unique ways for people to get involved. So how do they get involved?
Yeah, I agree. I think if you can join a book club, it's the best way to have the experience of the book and the philosophy and the community. So you can just go to thenewhappy.com/book club, and there's the sign up form available. And everyone is welcome, no matter where you are. There's 2 time zones, so hopefully it accommodates everybody who's listening. And again, it's free, and there's no requirement other than that you're willing to read the book and practice it together with the community.
And then the other thing that you do, which is, again, amazing, is that it isn't about just, I'm selling this or I'm selling that. You've given lots of free resources. So I just want people to know about that. One of your art, which is the wallpaper for the phones, which is glorious. So just so people know the best route, and I'm going to keep repeating this, and not everything, all the bumps that we're sending out as well, but just so that they know that there is more to this, that they then go and explore and get involved.
Yeah, there's tons of free resources like downloadables, printables, wallpapers, all sorts of stuff on the New Happy website. So if you go to thenewhappy.com/tools or /wallpaper, or just the homepage, you'll be able to see it there and be able to find all of the tools that will hopefully help you.
And then finally, not to put you on the spot, if there was one thing that you could share with one person, what would it be?
Like any one random person or a specific one?
No, any random person in regards to the work that you do.
And I'm going to give you 10 seconds to have more time to think, because that's an on-the-spot question.
I know, I do apologize.
Brain cogitate. I'd like to just share with you one extra thing from my perspective. One of the things I love the most about New Happy is it connects directly to something I've been doing for years that you amplified. And I only realized recently that I had forgot to tell people about this. And it was only in the summertime that I started to tell people about it again, thanks to you. And that was my own personal happiness model. Because most people think happiness, as you've talked about and Debbie's talked about today, is this materialistic existence from old happy. My happiness, due to life experiences, was number one, there's only 5 things. I'm alive in the morning. Number 2 is I have energy I can use because I've had many years of ill health and no energy. Number 3, I can eat today. Number 4, I can provide a living to provide for those that I love. And number 5, I get to spend time talking with Debbie. That Debbie wasn't on the list originally. She absolutely is now. And I can do that day to day. Every day is a new start. Then my happiness model is entirely internal. And I'm okay with that. And anyone listening, I'm just sharing that with you as that validation you gave me after all these years of being in coaching was just such a gift already. And I love that. So let's come back to Debbie's question. So that one thing, what have you cogitated?
Oh, well, I've been busy tearing up over your beautiful words. I wish that every person loved the people in their lives the way that you love Debbie.
Oh, thanks. We are a proper mutual appreciation society.
I know. I'm so touched. Sorry for my sobbing. I'm a real wuss. But I just find it to be so beautiful hearing people express their love for each other in that way. So actually that would probably be the one thing I would say. Just go try and love people and remember that you're a part of people. And that's what will help you to be happy.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. This has just been, I'm very fortunate. I've spent plenty of time around all of the work that you've been doing. And it genuinely drives me every day. So thank you. Really appreciate it. Very precious time.
I'm so grateful to both of you. I can't express enough how much it's It's people like you who have like given me so much more than I could ever describe, and your support and your encouragement and your kindness. I feel just like the luckiest person in the world to get to know two people like you and to get to be in community with you. It's such a gift and such a joy. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to And Double D. This episode would be best described by our grandchildren, who would most likely say phrases like, oh my God, or OMG, that they shouldn't probably be saying, but have learned. There is so much gold in this episode, just like some of the early ones that have been in this season already. I mean, we've been exploring New Happy with Stephanie Harrison. What a great conversation. Do take action and look up the website. Go and take those steps and join the book club and be part of the community and the collective experiences. Whatever your perspective, remember, I think one of the finest moments in this whole conversation is that your happiness could only be one single choice away. And if it is, what's the choice you're going to make? This has been Ann Double D. Thank you for listening.